The reluctance that people have to allow, like, the resistance against this Reagan film, do you think it's just a resistance about conservatism in general, or is it the idea that you're going to change people's perceptions about history? Because there's a lot of people, again, that have this very peripheral, low information view of who Reagan was. And so they want to have this negative spin on Reagan in history because he's a conservative.
I think, Reagan was a great president, and I think it gets perceived and compared to Trump, because there are comparisons to Trump and the things that if you get down to policy, there's a really good comparison to Trump, and maybe they see this as influencing an election by that comparison or whatever. But it's a free society here. It's about ideas we're able to express, and we're able to make up your own mind about it rather than deciding for people about what it was. And the Reagan movie it's not about ideology at all. I mean, Reagan was a Democrat for 40 years until the last 40 years of his life, or 35, he was a Republican. And it's about the Cold War and about his fight against communism. And, we won the Cold War under Reagan. And it was before that, appeasement had been practiced in this country. Jimmy Carter, God bless him, he did really well with the Egyptians and Israel in making peace in the Middle East. It was great about that. He wasn't so great with the Iran hostage thing. You remember the foiled, disastrous rescue attempt. Back then it seemed like everything failed. And but with the Soviets, he'd appeased it, like, gave away the B-1 bomber. He gave away a lot of things without getting anything in return from the Soviets as far as reducing the threat of war. And they took that, of course, as weakness and started to really build up their military and their missile strength to an unprecedented level. Americans were... There's a lot about Americans that it's kind of sweet in a way, and that the kumbaya thing. Why can't we be friends and just that humanity? I mean, that's the good-hearted, fantastic thing about America, but that's not the way the world works. We're all a product of the way that we grew up. We've basically grown up in this country with relative safety, and we have. A nation that has had laws that, form of law, and you do things the right way and the wrong way, or what you consider. But, can you imagine what it was like for Saddam to grow up in Iraq, or Xi, or Putin, and the way they grew up? That makes them the way they are, and the Russian people had grown up the same way. So you start to get a sense of how the rest of the world doesn't operate on the same rules that we are.
Right.
They actually have a more realistic way of looking at things, the way man has actually been from the tribal stage on. You got the water, and we want the water. Right. We don't want to share it. We want it ours. Right. Because you'll piss in it, and it'll destroy it. So we want it for ourselves. But Reagan came along, and he had the idea to bankrupt them, to make them spend. Star Wars, he came out with Star Wars. He really got that name from the movie, the whole Star Wars thing, which is now the Patriot defense system over in Israel. It didn't exist at that time. It was decades away from it. But he made the Russians think, at least 10%, that it might be real. Reagan even offered to share it with them, in exchange for let's take our missiles down to zero. And I got mad at him in Iceland when I thought he was acting like an old codger because they came up and said, we're offering you this, half the missiles or this or that. And he said no. Because they wanted us to get rid of Star Wars, which didn't exist. And he said, well, you have to get rid of Star Wars. And if we'd done that, the Soviets would have just gone on their merry way and been doing what they would have had been doing. But Reagan said no. And the Soviet